So now let's take a quick overview of what is in each section. We start at Genesis, the book of beginnings. This is where we learn of the origins of everything important to the overall story. It starts off by explaining that God created the world as we know it, the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, the ocean, the animals, etc. It then goes on to tell us that having created the perfect environment, God then created the first man and woman in his likeness. In other words, he made humans to resemble himself. Genesis chapter 1 verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." Now this concept right here is perhaps one of the single most important concepts that we need to grasp if we are going to understand the rest of the Bible. God created the human race with a very specific purpose in mind, and that is to be reflections of his greatness. We are designed to be like God himself. We are created to demonstrate his moral perfection, his wisdom, his righteousness, his patience, his justice, his love, his mercy, his creativity, his governance, his management, and judgment, etc. And this does not only apply to just a few special people, but to every single human being. Every one of us has been designed to reflect the greatness of God. When we receive life from God, we also receive the honor and the responsibility of maintaining his image and his likeness in ourselves. It is the highest honor of any created being. So you see, God has a very high view of humankind and also very high expectations. Because in God's mind, when he created Adam and Eve, he created something special. He created reflections of himself. But not long after Adam and Eve were created, their allegiance to God and their responsibility to uphold the image of God will be tested. Satan, a disobedient, rebellious spirit, attempted to convince the first man and woman to disobey God and to consider another course of life. In essence, he told them that instead of cooperating with God and pleasing him, they could disobey God and please themselves. They could ignore God's rules and create their own rules, and that they could do all of this without consequence. Satan understated the power, authority, provision, and security that Adam and Eve would have enjoyed if they were to maintain their relationship with God, and instead he offers them short-term pleasures outside of God's boundaries. He presented disobedience and rebellion as freedom and enlightenment, and ultimately he deceived them. Unfortunately, Adam and Eve accepted Satan's suggestion, and in so doing, they lost their position of authority and privilege. They are now under a curse. They became infected with the mind of Satan, which is in essence the mind of disobedience, rebellion, and self-centered thinking, where God is no longer at the center, but rather self and self-exaltation. This frame of mind naturally creates ever-increasing separation between God and man. Satan robbed Adam and Eve of God's ideal vision for them and gave them a lie instead. The lie that they could be happy, satisfied, and fulfilled, and that they could reach their full potential as human beings and become like God, but without respecting God. Every child that Adam and Eve gave birth to would be similarly infected with this rebellious frame of mind from birth. And as the population grew, this self-centered, rebellious way of thinking and living would grow with it. In fact, this corrupt way of thinking would spread like cancer and run rampant throughout the entire earth. So much so that in Genesis chapter 6 we read that the entire earth was full of great wickedness and that God was not at all pleased. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is where God decided to start over, if you will. The inhabitants of the earth were collectively disrespecting God and rebelling against Him. They completely disregarded their purpose and their calling to be sons of God, and they ignored the responsibility to uphold and maintain the image of God. Instead, their actions and thoughts proved that they preferred to be sons of Satan. And so God decided to judge the entire world with a global flood, preserving only Noah and his family. This, of course, is where the story of Noah and the ark fits in. So in Genesis 9, God starts over with Noah. In essence, He gives Noah the same commandment that He had given to Adam. Genesis chapter 9 verse 1 reads, So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Noah and his family proceeded to dwell on the earth, and soon the human race began to multiply again. But not long after, we read in Genesis 11, that mankind had again collectively started to ignore and disrespect God's commandments. However, God does not judge them the same way that He did before. He allows them to live.